Do you ever think about how what you do or say can make such a huge impression on somebody and you may not even be aware of it? Or then again, maybe you will be. I want to talk to you about 3 stories out of the book of Daniel. Now, you've probably heard the stories before. You've heard the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Hebrew boys who were thrown into the fiery furnace because they wouldn't do what the king wanted them to do. Well, the king saw them walking around the fiery furnace with looked like a 4th person in there. So what does the king do? This is with Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel chapter 3, in verse 28, he says, this is Nebuchadnezzar. This is a heathen, okay? Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god but their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the land of Babylon. They were captives. They were not natives. And yet the king caused them to prosper. Why? Because they were faithful to God, and God was faithful to them. So let's flip over a page here. And we're still with Nebuchadnezzar. Now, by this time, Nebuchadnezzar's had a dream. The dream has been fulfilled. This is years later. And Nebuchadnezzar's talking again in Daniel chapter 4, starting in verse 34. This is a heathen king in Babylon. And this is what happened. At the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. Well, the reason he got himself in a pickle to begin with is because he didn't do that. This is Nebuchadnezzar. You ever hear these words before? For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. Heathen king is saying this. And all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. But he does according to his will in the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of earth. And no one can ward off his hand or say to him, what hast thou done? At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me. For the glory of my kingdom, and my counselors and my nobles began seeking me out. So I was reestablished in my sovereignty, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven. For all his works are true, and his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. Nebuchadnezzar knew that for a fact because he had walked in pride, and he got humbled. You know, sometimes we think that what we do and what we say, nobody notices, nobody cares. But sometimes just being faithful to God, not turning away from him, people notice. Now, let's go one more verse here, or section, in Daniel chapter 6. Now, at this time, Daniel had been made one of the rulers under King Darius. So we're in a different king now. And Darius knew that Daniel was faithful, and he was raising him up, higher levels of government. And of course, the natives were not happy because this foreigner is being exalted above us. We should be the ones in charge, not some foreigner. I'm thinking of a certain man right now who was born in another country, is doing a lot for the United States of America, and a lot of people are not happy, but I'm not going to mention any names. Okay, enough political stuff. Let's go on here to Daniel. Now, the other people who were in charge convinced Darius to make a rule that nobody could pray to anybody but Darius for 30 days. And they did this to get Daniel in trouble. And Darius found out what Daniel was doing, and he had to fulfill his law. He had to do what the law said he was going to do. So he's throwing Daniel into the lion's den. You've heard the story of Daniel in the lion's den. He gets thrown in the lion's den. The angels shut the mouths of the lions. Darius pulls him out. Darius is happy because he liked Daniel. So this is what Darius says. This is another king. He says, I make a decree. This is chapter 6 and verse 26. I make a decree that all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. Would anybody look at you and say the God of your name be exalted because of what God is doing in your life? For he is the living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion is forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So Daniel, taken as a young man, taken from his land of Israel, made a slave, but educated in the new land, and he prospers and he becomes high in the government under Nebuchadnezzar, and then under Darius, and then under Cyrus. So this was a man who was faithful to his God, who honored his God through his whole life, because by the time he's under Cyrus, he's sure not a young man. He's already gone through 2 kings. Now he's hitting a 3rd one. So how does this apply to you? Be faithful. You know, I was even looking back at the life of Joseph today. Joseph was taken as a young man as a slave into Egypt. And what happened to Joseph? Because, you know, Joseph, he was kind of a twit. If you read the story of Joseph's early life, you know, he was the favored son, and he was proud of it, and oh, everybody's going to bow down to me, and oh, this isn't a story about Joseph, but go back and read what Joseph was like in his younger years. And yet, he was faithful to God. You know, in Hebrew culture, they taught their children from a very young age about their God. And so when their children grew up, their children did not forget God. Daniel was taken, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were all taken at a young age. And they were educated by their captives. But they did not forget God. They honored God. So honor God even when things seem to be going against you. Even when it doesn't look like it's to your advantage. Because for Daniel to go on his rooftop and face Jerusalem and pray, as was his custom, when he'd already heard the law that you can't do that, or you're going to go to the lion's den. But he did it. He continued to be faithful to his God, and he suffered the consequences. He was thrown into the lion's den, but God rescued him. Now, I know that there are a lot of Christians today in foreign countries that are persecuted and that are dying for their faith. But they're faithful. They're not turning away from God. They're not denying Jesus as their Lord, even unto death. Now, we in America, we are blessed. We are not threatened with losing our lives most of the time. There have been some. But most of us have never faced death because of our faith in Jesus. But I pray that we would be strong enough that should the need arise, we will be faithful to death and not deny our Lord Jesus the Christ, the Son of the living God. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for liking and sharing and subscribing and leaving comments. And I'll talk to you soon.